Hi, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Auto Heterophiles. Today, I'm joined by Lauren and a self aware AGP, and we're going to discuss her experience. Thanks for coming on the channel, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Usually, I start out with asking people about some of their early experiences with
Mm.
like gender feelings or things that they, in hindsight, recognize as stemming from autogynephiliia. And so I'm just curious, what Um, did you have experiences in childhood of wanting to be a woman or anything like that?
Yeah, so my closest thing in that regard, which I say closest, but I realize in hindsight this is related, is autoandrophobia. That is the thing that hits me the hardest and is the earliest by far. Like when I was very, very young, my dad and grandfathers and that sort of thing, pretty much all the males in my family and just in my society around me that I perceived were just obviously more masculine, more manly than I am. And I know there would be exceptions. Like I know I would have seen exceptions, but they just like didn't register to me, because I'm comparing myself to my father, my grandfather, that kind of thing primarily. And I obviously wasn't comparatively to them, partially because I was a young boy, right? And then partially also because I didn't like the things that they did. I wasn't interested in cars. I wasn't interested in like sports games with like a ball, like ball sport kind of stuff. I wasn't super interested in rough and tumble play. I'm sure that I was, but it didn't seem like I was to the degree that I ought be. And then that gave me this sense of like, oh, I'm insufficient. Like I'm not man enough, not male enough or something, which again, in hindsight as a kid makes perfect sense because like you're literally single digit age, like you haven't even hit puberty, like give yourself a break. But it didn't register to me like that at the time. It just registered as I am male in a way that is insufficient and bad. That's the first thing that I was hit with. And I remember that kind of as a through line through basically my whole childhood. That primed me then that when I got a bit older and like there's a whole bunch of events that happened here in terms of like
Around
parents
what age was it
divorce.
that you were experiencing the autoandrophobia?
I think I was like 5 to 7, somewhere in that range. I
Oh
say
yeah,
that
that's
because
early.
yeah, like I know that was first year of primary school, leading into third year of primary school, which, and I know that was third year because my parents divorced in my third year of primary school. So, and it predates that. So it was pretty early. Yeah. I don't know if, I don't know why that is exactly, obviously. I don't have, you know, like the omnipotence to notice that. But that was the biggest through line for me. It was just, I always hated myself and what I put that hated part of myself onto was the male part. Like, I'm bad. Why am I bad? I'm bad because I'm male. Yeah. Because I'm insufficiently masculine, insufficiently man, insufficiently male. So I'm like failed male. That was the internalization that I had.
And how did that change as you got older?
Mainly got far worse. The After my parents' divorce, there was a long period of time where my mum was too busy to kind of interact with me much, and fair enough. And we don't share that many interests either, so obviously that's hard for her to do. I have one sister; she's 2 years younger. She wasn't a particularly interesting person for me to want to hang around. In hindsight, she could have been. I just like didn't want to, and like I can get more into that later. I think that I was very jealous of her, which made me not want to interact with her, like not want to acknowledge her even, because it was just like painful to see this other person who, in a way, could have been me and is just treated way better, does way better, and it seems effortless. Yeah. But as I got older, though, I had unlimited access to the internet, which was completely unmonitored, and I think that's where it then became autogynephilic for me in a more positive, like goal-directed sense, as opposed to the just autoandrophilic. I hate myself and I hate my male self. That is the reason that I am bad from it. The
What kind of stuff were you getting into online?
So initially it was just like video game stuff. I didn't sexually awaken until I think it was my first year of middle school, roughly, which would have been about, I think, age 12 or 13, something like that. And that was, uh, sorry, the story on this one is kind of funny. There was a kid on the bus to school that I would see every morning and every afternoon. He was, I think, 1 or 2 years older than me. And he was like the cool kid. He sat at the back, you know, with all the other like delinquent adjacent cool kids. And for whatever reason, he took an interest in me. Like he thought that I was either interesting to talk to or maybe had potential or something like that. That's how I perceived it. And we had just like a talking friendship where he would introduce me to stuff and it would be fun and he would have fun introducing me to it. And I'm not talking about drugs in this case. I'm talking about uh, interesting things, one of which ended up being pornography, specifically hentai. He sort of went, "Do you watch porn yet?" And I go, "No." And I don't know if I said, "Should I?" But I feel like I asked something to that extent, to which he said, "You can give it a go, like, see what you think." And so I go, "Well, okay." I go home that day and I look up like hentai by name, and immediately I'm sort of like, "Oh, okay, I see why people would look this up. Like, that makes sense." And then I spend a few hours on there clicking through the categories on the particular porn site, and then come back to him a few days later and say to him, "Hey, so I looked it up, and you know, these are the things that I like from it." And one of which inexplicably happens to be furry. uh, and he didn't intend nor expect that. And he had this expression on his face where he just sort of went, "Oh, damn, sorry about that."
Yeah.
Yeah, as if it's like, it's like, "I'm sorry I unlocked that for you. My bad." Yeah, the that's how that began. I think that through that though, it got me into, like, I read a lot as a kid, like fantasy novels primarily, and it was always from like an adventure perspective that I found them interesting, and like world building was also pretty strong and still is. All of the fictions that I like tend to be ones because the world building is really strong. So like Warhammer 40K is an obvious one. The I ended up getting into text role playing because it's a way to. I already was interested in reading text stories in book form and otherwise, and then I was interested in writing them a little bit, and then I realized, oh wait, I can do this interactively with another person. And at that point, I just got into that, and because I was already adjacent to like the furry community at that point, because there's an amount of interest there on just like an instinctual level, I guess, for me, which is not very big in my life at all anymore, mind you. Like it's definitely the potential is there, but I don't need it. It just happened to be the community that I fell into at the time. And then that very quickly became like sexual role playing with inevitably what was like much older adults, which at the time I thought this is fine because I'm behind a computer and I'm not telling them anything troublesome for them about myself and my age at the time. But at the same time, I see in hindsight that it was like wholly inappropriate relationships, even if it was purely digital. I didn't meet up with adults or anything like that. I didn't go around revealing my age as if that was some, you know, interesting thing about it. Like I knew that it was wrong on some level. I just didn't realize the full extent of it. Uh, through doing sexual role playing stuff, though, it very quickly became apparent to me, maybe age 14, 15, it may have been at this point, where I realized I really mostly just like playing the female characters, you know? And at that point,
Yeah.
it became somewhat obvious to me that I like male characters as characters, and I have some male characters, you know, that I would use, but they would always be supporting cast, I guess, to the female characters. And it was the female characters that I felt the most appropriate to self insert into, I guess, in terms of goals and worries and uh, relations and like emotional motivations, I guess, that sort of thing. Like it always, it never made sense to project onto a male, I guess. Almost almost inexplicably in hindsight, in foresight. In hindsight, I'm like, oh, okay, no, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
The uh, yeah, it's only very recently, like in the last maybe year, where I think there was an interview that you were on. I don't know if it was Buck or if it was Boyce, but there was one of them where Tough Tudge actually mentioned this recently on Naval Gaze, which is that you said something to the effect of like any sexual relationship, it initially is very to males, mind you, on average, it's very lust filled and like sex goal driven initially, but then it becomes more normalized. It becomes more romantic, more simmery in a way that gives you like the warm, fuzzy feelings. That's kind of how it became that to me very quickly in a way where I no longer registered it as sexual. I just thought of it as this is the thing that makes sense because it emotionally resonates with me and it uh satisfies a bunch of things that doesn't bring in anything else that I don't want, like the autoandrophobia angle. It's like I don't have to pay attention to the fact that I hate myself that I'm male if I'm absorbed in the fantasy pretense that I'm female. Yeah.
Right. It helps you. You don't even have to consider it at all. You can just exist
Mm.
in that sort of version of yourself that you're more comfortable in.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's not even strictly a version of myself. As in it's not meant to be a one to one to myself, if that makes sense. It's more like it shares strong common elements with myself that I'm trying to explore, but the character is not meant to be literally me.
Oh, like you have had multiple different female characters?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like many, many. And they have, like, all of them have sort of different purposes that they're for. Like, one of them is actually, I'll get onto that one last. One of them, their purpose, as it turns out, seems to have been to explore the idea of wanting to be a mother but never being able to, which is really interesting because I've had that one maybe like 10 years at this point. Very interesting. The But then I have other ones that are more like exploring masculinity. The point of the character is for them to be as masculine a female as possible in order to explore the idea of being masculine without having to be male. Like that's the last part is the part that's said quietly, even to myself.
And what age are you now?
I'm 29.
And I forget, did you transition?
Oh, yeah, sorry, that's worth mentioning. I transitioned when I was 17. I actually intentionally planned to leave home after I finished school, which I did. And I did that with the intent to go and transition essentially in secret. Well, not strictly in secret, more like where I know that my parents couldn't stop me from doing it. That's the bigger thing. Uh, and to be clear on that one, the way that I did that is at that point in my life, I had met other trans people online. Like, obviously, for a long time, I'd had that. And then that through that, I met someone who then became my partner, like internet partner, mind you. I'd known them for about 2, 3 years at that point, and we arranged that I'm going to flee the state that I'm in after high school and go and live with them, which I did. Yeah. Fortunately for me, that didn't end up in like a getting graped situation. So that's really good.
Yeah, how did that go? Like you changed what state you lived in and
Mm.
to live with them?
Yeah. It was, in hindsight, it was definitely like a teenage rebellion thing primarily. Like, I didn't have to move that far. It just happened to be a way where, like, I hated my family at that point. My mum, my dad, pretty much everything to do with it. Uh, Definitely like the boiling resentment of like I'm not who I want to be, and these people exist to remind me of what it is that I'm not. I guess like it's a projection. I don't think I was that harshly treated in general, but at the time it felt like the biggest possible deal because you're a teenager, so everything is a bigger deal. Um, I knew that it would hurt my dad to move really far away and refuse to interact with him in a way where I'm going to be doing something I know he disapproves of and he can't stop me. I knew it would hurt him to do it. And definitely part of my motivation at the time as a resentful, like rebellious male teenager was I knew this would hurt my dad and the other members of my family, like as a sort of self-destructive payback, I guess. It
Yeah,
wasn't the
sort of
only
like acting
motivation,
out of
mind you.
spite a little bit.
Yeah, it wasn't the only motivation, but in hindsight, it was a substantial one. I should clarify that I have actually since gone back to reconcile with my family pretty extensively. Like I basically went to all of them individually that have relevance to this and have said like, yeah, so I was an idiot. I'm really sorry about that. Um, I hope you can forgive me for that. So, there's that. And that went well.
Yeah, I would hope so. That'd be crazy if
Yeah.
you did that and then they were like, "No, actually, we don't wanna
Yeah.
see you anymore."
I mean, to be honest, if they did, like, fair enough on some level, but that did not happen. So that's really good. I have a pretty good relationship with my family at this point. For the last like two years or so, I think I have. Yeah, I've been having pretty substantial life turnaround moments in the last 2, 3 ish years. Um, Sorry, before I forget it, I wanted to mention in regards to getting on the internet really early, unsupervised, unmonitored, pretty much 24/7,
Yeah.
kind of like raised by internet.
That was
Um,
before parents knew better.
yeah, basically. The they'd tell you stranger danger, but spend unlimited time on the internet talking to whoever, and we're not going to check on it. Uh, because I was around furries primarily, that was like my community when I was younger. It There's a pretty big intersection in the furry community with what is now the progressive movement, and through that, it became obvious to me that I found other people that hated men and hated males, right? And these are
Yeah.
people that I would have called friends, and that many of whom I think I still do actually. And that was just in the water. Like the male hatred, the man hatred, which is, I imagine it's kind of a displacement for hating authority structures, I guess, hating patriarchal authority structures, essentially, whether that be within their own family or the perception of it in society at larger. Um, but it does trickle down to hatred of men individually. Uh, because I already was primed to hate myself, think that the source of what it is that is hateable about me is in fact my maleness, my insufficient maleness. Because it's like, well, if I'm not big, if I'm not strong, if I'm not tough, if I'm not aggressive, whatever, then I'm just a failed male. Like I don't even get to enjoy the supposed fruits of being a dominator. So if I can't do that, then what's left for me? And what's left for me is, well, then I get introduced to you can transition. At which point I go, oh no, that makes total sense. That's absolutely what I should do. Like I was totally primed for that solution to be presented to me and go, yes, I'll do that.
And you said so? Did you said you started transitioning at 17?
Yes. Yeah. I did so via like gray market, like internet drugstore, received by mail methods. So this was
Yeah.
2013. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
quite easy to buy drugs off the internet.
It is, particularly if they're not controlled substances, which hormones and anti-androgens are not controlled substances. I mean, testosterone is, androgens are, but not estrogen and not testosterone blocking medication.
So you started transitioning at 17,
Mm.
and are you still on hormones?
No, I have not been for the last coming up on 3 years, but at least two. The last time that I had anything, it was like a pellet implant, and I just sort of never went back for it because I realized that this is like probably one of the bigger things that came to me is that I need to try to become a biological parent. I believe that's something that I need to do in order for my life to be one that was worth having lived. Like, I don't mind if I fail in that pursuit. Like, obviously, I mind, but I mean, like, I don't think my life is bad if I fail in that pursuit. It's just I have to try to do it.
And have you um have you been dating women, or like how are you going about doing that?
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's an entirely different angle that we now can tackle. I am married and have been for 3 years at this point. Um, and I'm married to a trans man.
Yeah. And he's okay with doing, like, potentially getting pregnant at some point?
Initially, no, but now, yes. That was its own saga that took like multiple years to work through, where like initially it started with me realizing this is something I need to try and do with my life. Oh god, this is going to be awful to have to ask, and it's something where I need to respect whatever answer comes out because it's obviously ultimately a personal choice. And why would I even want to have kids with somebody who doesn't want to have kids? That sounds like a recipe for all kinds of terrible disaster, and not just for me, like for the kids, you know? So that became like a multi year series of questions, which led to an amount of couples therapy, which we both agreed to go to. Like that was something that we wanted to do as part of like trying to find solutions on this. And where we eventually came to was like we both want to have the result of having a family together. It's just that he really doesn't want to go through the physiological realities of being pregnant, which is completely fair. I mean, that's true of most females, is my understanding. Like, it's something you do because you want the result of it, not because you want to be pregnant. There are exceptions. This is my understanding of a norm.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're right that I mean that if there was I mean, I think rich women are showing that with how many of them get
Yeah.
surrogates to carry the
Yep.
child.
Yep. Absolutely. We did consider that at one point, and then when I looked into the stuff around surrogacy, I realized, oh, this is really not super well researched, not super well studied, way more dangerous than normal. Um, I don't think I can like call myself a good person while pursuing that and spend the exorbitant amounts of money necessary to make it happen as well.
Yeah. It's upsetting on an ethical level, but also just very expensive too.
Yeah, I mean, there's an amount of ethics in the money as well. It's like, how much are you willing to spend on your kid in order for them to exist, like in a specific way that would be more comfortable for you, that results in you just having less money to be able to invest in them once they exist. And then, maybe you go through this process in order to have one child. It's like, okay, you probably could have had three if you had done it like normally. And in which case, like, was your convenience really worth the lives of two other potential people? Like, I think not. I think it comes down to no. I think it comes down to the point of being a parent is to live your life in service of something greater than yourself. And if you're beginning that journey by making huge decisions in favor of your own convenience, like, I think you're stumbling out of the gate.
Yeah, I think and I suspect that doing it the natural way will there's a lot of wisdom in just doing things the traditional way because it's been done that way
Mm.
for
To,
for a
to be
good
clear,
reason. Yeah.
yeah, to be clear, we're not actually doing it the strictly traditional way. And I say that because, like, I am maybe 10 to 20%, as is the word virile? Um, I'm only 10 to 20% of the sperm count and sperm quality that I ought be for someone my age. And because that's something we've tested now. So, good news is that that can be used for IVF purposes. Bad news is it's probably never going to happen naturally. So we are actually through that forced to use IVF if we want to have results in a timely manner.
Yeah. I think that's getting more common for people to have to use IVF.
True. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. I mean, take your pick: microplastics, failing dating markets, uh, general decline of civilization. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people are ending up having to pursue reproductive assistance technologies.
Um, with I think you've mentioned before that you're planning on doing a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
I
could
do
you
have.
talk more about that and like what your plan is for it and why you're doing it?
Yep, sure. The YouTube channel that I keep thinking of making one like every few months and then never end up actually following through on it, which is a very normal thing for me, mind you. the the purpose of it is I feel like it's important that my story get out there so that other people can hear it, and then things that they feel like resonate with them can be seen in a way that isn't like a condemnation. Like, my autogynephilic tendencies or proclivities, I suppose, are not outweighed remotely by my uh, autoandrophobic tendencies. And so it wasn't obvious to me that those were connected and that those were like things that can cause each other or that multiply each other. And it took me hearing you say that, and then for me to then further look into it to investigate that, like after I'd first heard it, for me to make the connection and thus make better understanding of myself. So because of that, I want to have a channel space to talk about that stuff so that other people can benefit from my mistakes or my ignorance, I suppose.
When you um when did you make that connection between autogynephilia and autoandrophobia?
I think it's when I was it's hard to pinpoint a specific moment. I can think of little instances that feel connected. So there was one time where is it Ray Alex Williams was
Yeah.
talking about uh he was talking about how pursuing transition can worsen dysphoria. I think that's where I first heard that. And I've definitely come across it before when I was a lot younger. Like when I was sort of initially transitioning, I did have an approach of I have a medical condition. I'm just trying to treat the medical condition. I'm not trying to be special. I'm just trying to live my life in a way that feels manageable. That was always my approach to it. I actually didn't have misconceptions about the idea that I could be female. I more just was I knew that I could pursue transition as a method to be perceived as female and thus treat the dysphoria sense. I just figured that dysphoria is the condition that I have, gender dysphoria, and that by treating that, I would have a better life in a way that would make it bearable. And when I say bearable, like I was definitely subject to the sort of ongoing mind virus in relation to like uh, you will commit unalive if you do not transition. You will uh, that affected me pretty heavily when I was making the decision to transition or not initially. I thought I was, I think, given some sort of question in relation to can you imagine yourself not having transitioned at the age of 30, maybe 40? What about 50? And when I started thinking of that, mind you, as a 17-year-old, as a 16, 17-year-old, my answer that came up in my head to that was no, I can't imagine that. That sounds like hell. I would rather be dead. And then that led me to the sort of obvious teenage conclusion of ergo, I ought transition.
Yeah, while you were transitioned, like what started um getting you to sort of decide to detransition? Was it just the desire to have kids, or was there other things that were making you
Definitely
think
other
to do that?
things. The it's a tired meme at this point, but I definitely come under the category of like I didn't leave the left left me kind of position where I don't feel like I've changed my positions on quite a few things and certainly haven't changed my moral value system in like a core sense. It's more that things have moved away from me in a way where, it became too obvious to me just observing my peers that too many of them are motivated by resentment. And to be clear, initially, that was a big motivation for me. I just conveniently forgot about that once I was more past it. And then the I would meet too many aggressive autogynephiles, like the kind who like they they get aggressive with you the way a man at the bar would if you insult his girlfriend. Like, it's the sort of, like, I have to punch on with you now because it's a point of pride because you've insulted my, like, my choice of mate, and that's like a step too far. Like, that kind of response from misgendering them, say. And
Yeah.
I understand that in hindsight as actually making a lot of sense, but at the time I just sort of went like, oh, this, like, these people are real, they actually exist. And these people, my understanding of that at the time was pretty limited to like the sort of the reason that bathroom segregation exists, I guess. Um, there was obviously plenty of misogyny, like genuine misogyny, to be found, both just broadly and also like within trans community. And when I say trans community, I also mean the crossover between internet furry and internet trans is pretty heavy. Um, the obvious misogyny never struck particularly well with me. Like, I don't know how to juxtapose. No, it never sat well with me that it's, you're putting so much time and effort into wanting to be a woman, let alone believing that you are, and yet you seem to hate women. Like, it's, I'm assuming it's like a jealousy and envy thing
Yeah.
to a good degree,
Y-
which,
It sounded like you experienced it like with regards to your sister growing up.
yeah, yeah, like that sort of thing. Where it's not that I didn't, it's not that I couldn't like my sister, that I couldn't be friends with her, that I couldn't have any kind of relation that was productive with her. It's that it didn't even occur to me to try because there was just this, I don't want to be reminded of what I'm not to be around you. Yeah. I think it definitely was like an echo of that ongoing more broadly toward like women on a whole. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that happens a lot with the sort of online trans communities where,
Mm,
like, say, the trans women, where they mostly socialize amongst each other and don't necessarily have many female friends.
mm. Yeah. That was probably true of me at some stage, though never for very long, I guess. I have, like, my, of course, people could be lying on the internet, mind you, but my understanding is that I had a number of female friends that come and go, and that it wasn't like super weird and super jealous for me as I got older. But there was definitely cases that were, that triggered that, especially for me. Oh, here's a really good autogynephilic related thing that I can mention here. The thing that would trigger the envy and jealousy the most for me was the sort of girl next door, tomboy gamer girl kind of category of woman.
Yeah.
And like the reason I think, of course, I don't know to what degree I'm editorializing this in hindsight, right? This is just my best attempt, is I was never interested in wearing makeup. I was never interested in having like super femininely styled hair in like a high effort kind of capacity. I was never interested in wearing super feminine, like super feminine coded clothing. Like I'm talking about like dresses, for example. Like I just don't have a particular interest in that. Like it doesn't, I'm not negative toward it, but I'm not particularly positive toward it. The things that are of interest to me about it is like the social role aspect and the like physiology, the actually like having breasts, like having vagina, being able to be a mother, being able to be pregnant, kind of thing. That's the stuff that was interesting to me, that I wanted, that I envied, and that felt like, I'm not sure how much of that was because it wasn't male and because it was an alternative to male, which I hated so much, and because it was the only other alternative to male, then, you know, I inflated the value of it in my own head to the degree that I pursued it how I did, or if that's an ad hoc justification. Like, I don't know to what degree one came first. Yeah, I don't know which one came first. I know that the autoandrophobia came first. That's the thing that I'm most certain about. I just don't know how related it is, or whether it's been something I've adopted because it's been presented to me as a solution. I'm not sure how internal it is, I guess, because it's just too messy at this point.
What?
Um,
How did you come across the concept of autoandrophobia?
uh, I think that was Isaac Uncooked about a year or two ago. The idea of maybe 2, 3 years ago, there was a video he did where he spoke about autoandrophobia, and that just resonated with me. I barely remember it at this point. I just know that he was kind of crying about, I just hate that, I hate being male, I hate being a man kind of thing. And I went, yeah, that's probably the word for it. And that makes me think that, like, this fits a pattern of behavior and thoughts in myself that I had noticed for a long time, but I'd never really paid attention to it as a collective. I'd just seen it as, yeah, obviously I hate being male because I don't want to be male. I want to be something else. But whether or not I want to be the something else because I start by hating myself being male, again, not entirely clear. I think that it's because I started by hating the fact that I'm male. But having that word for it made me think this is probably the origin point of it, in terms of at least the first kind of feeling I felt on it. Whether or not I would have gone on to, hit puberty, discover porn, and realize that actually I'm definitely into I'm definitely far more interested in the idea of envisioning myself in the female role, like both bodily and socially, than the male one. But obviously, like, we can't run that experiment and see what would happen if it hadn't come from the already hating myself perspective.
Yeah. Do you think in an alternative timeline where you didn't transition, do you think you would have been able to um, handle the like growing masculinization during that period uh, and being male?
I think that it's absolutely possible that I could have been fine with it. I could have been okay with it. Like, I almost definitely would. Again, the editorializing is super strong. The I think that I still would have pursued, like, laser hair removal as an example, just because I don't like the feeling of body hair, specifically on me. Like, on others, it's sort of just like neutral. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's just, it is what it is. But on me, I hate it. It's upsetting. There's, I'm not sure how much of that is like an aversion to the idea of getting older, I guess. It's like, oh no, puberty is happening. I'm getting older. The expectations are mounting. I have to be more of a man now, but I don't want to be a man and I don't feel capable of being a man. And the hair growth is a signal, a sign that that's happening, whether or not I want it to. Uh, or if it's just, I just don't like having scratchy skin with hair on it. It's sort of, I don't know which one it is.
Yeah, I think it's
And
common for AGPs to not like to have body hair for it to bother
mm,
them and to remove it.
mm, the like to add more color onto that, the despite the fact that I've been sort of passively detransitioning for the last like 2, 3 years, I like I still get touch ups on the laser hair removal for my face because I just don't want facial hair. Like, it upsets me. It makes me feel ugly and gross. um, so like, even if I, even though my mindset toward, like, I don't hate that I'm male, that has calmed down significantly in recent years because I've come to realize that there are actually strengths to it that are good and important, and I can still be feminine in ways that make me feel like I don't have to be the big bad monster that I was, you know, that I perceived that I was destined to become. Like I had to be a bad man. I think part of that probably came from like I didn't have any good role models that felt like something I could actually amount to. That was the insufficiency thing. Like if I had met more adult males that were that struck me as honorable and successful and yet sufficiently feminine and or unmasculine at least, and more into the kinds of things I was into, I would have I think I would have been a lot faster to go, oh, okay, it's actually fine to be what I am. I'm not actually insufficient. I'm not inherently broken. I'm not destined to become some like roided grapist or something like that, as internet feminism like told me that I had the potential to be and would probably become if I continued. Uh, the uh, yeah, sorry, I think I lost the part that I was going on that.
What you had mentioned earlier, that politically that the left you,
Mm.
that sort of feeling. Uh, can you talk a bit about sort of your ideological changes or ideological detransition, however you'd
Oh,
consider
yeah,
it?
yeah. So the and it I mentioned before that initially what brought me in on like the trans narrative, such as to transition myself, is the idea that I have a medical condition, gender dysphoria, which I'm trying to medicate in a capacity that will allow me to live a life worth living. That was my initial buy-in premise. Like I knew that what I was doing was experimental, and I thought, yeah, cool. I get to be an experimenter, on myself, and that's admirable. That's cool. That's honorable in some way. And then, now here we are, X many years later, and I'm left with the realization that okay, the experiment is done now for the most part, and we have many more numbers, we have many more methods, and I think that it's just a net bad on society for it to be as big as it is, as promoted as it is, as glorified and whitewashed, I suppose, in the way that it is, and then like the negatives minimized. Yeah, I think that it was realizing the harms that were being done to people by the sort of hardest, the most virulent strain of trans ideology that made me realize that I don't want to be a part of this anymore because it's hurting people. What brought me into it was I want to help people, including myself. And then that same thing that got me into it is what got me out of it, which is I don't think it's helping people anymore. And mind you, I'm sure there are individuals that it can help, and it's difficult here because we need to distinguish between like trans ideology, of which there is at least two major kinds. Like you have like non-binarism, I don't have an official term for this, versus like binary trans, which I think roughly, is the too cute, true
Y-
scum
Yeah.
division thing. Yeah. So like there's at least two major camps. Um, and then actual medical transition itself, and then implemented functional social transition. These are all different things. So I don't mean to say that social transition doesn't help some people or that medical transition doesn't help some people. And when I say help, I mean help in net, I guess, like net help, because there's inevitable harms to all of these things. But the point is that we're making trade offs, hopefully, in an informed capacity to the degree that it in net helps somebody. Um, I just realized that it seems that in net we're doing more damage. That's what made me go, this has to change. Like, this is not okay anymore.
Yeah, it's what when you say that you think it's mostly causing net harm, like which aspects of it do you think are causing the harm?
So I think the probably the biggest one is that it's a sort of delayed adolescent fantasy in which, as an ideology, it can get people stuck in the idea of having to be like put all of your time and effort and emotion into the idea of just trying to be more female, trying to be more male or something like that, or present as more female, present as more male. Like, it's a sort of, we should be focusing on trying to be more ourselves. And that's not something that's being done when you're putting all of your effort into trying to be more of some specific cookie cut thing, like some stereotype of some kind, whether or not you see it as a positive or negative, because, there's like a goth stereotype, I guess, and there's people who put years of their life when they were teenagers into trying to be the ideal goth. And that's something that, in hindsight to them, often can be a bit cringy. And, like, fair enough, it's just a thing that will happen to so many people. The issue is when it's then either goes on too long and interrupts opportunities for other relationships, actual personal development, changes in kind in terms of how they're living their life, such as getting married, having kids, um, having a productive career, that kind of thing. And then also the actual, like, potentially psychological, but certainly medical harms that are being done by the drugs themselves, but then and then also the ways in which they relate to people and the stresses that they feel because of the added burdens by the ideology. Like, the realization that I don't hate myself much for being male anymore because I've realized the strengths in it is just like, it's frustrating to think of how much better I could have felt earlier if I had just let go and stopped worrying so much about becoming something that I'm not, and that it would be really, really hard to do. And I knew it would be hard to do. That wasn't part of the equation. It's that I didn't realize that wanting it so much created a distance from which the suffering sprouts forth. Yeah.
Yeah, the desire for something like that is so unobtainable basically brings about suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you when you create a comparison, you create suffering. If you create a comparison that is unachievable, you create, like, infinite suffering because you can never get there.
Yeah, and I think that's part of like why I haven't done the medicalization, just because
Mm,
it'd be such a steep. It's just so unobtainable for someone like I'm physically much more masculine than most men, and it just
mm,
like the sheer impossibility of it. It just seems like it would just be a constant road of suffering and feeling like I'm failing, and
yeah.
it's much easier to just sort of come to terms with being male. And even though if it were a free choice, I wouldn't pick it, just accepting that it is the case, and that like you're saying, there are some good aspects of being male.
Mm, absolutely. I mean, obviously, this is from our biased perspectives, right? When we say there are some parts about being male that are good.
Right, I know, like, yeah, as an AGP, it's harder to, like, come up with a long list of all the great aspects of being male, but
We could try.
there are some good things. Like, I feel that, like, on average, males have greater, like, emotional stability, um, And I don't know if that's the
because of not having a
testosterone.
cycle.
Right. Yeah, maybe not having the cycle or just the testosterone itself, I think, is mood stabilizing. I remember when I was before I hit
Somewhat, I
puberty,
think,
I was
yeah.
very sensitive and could cry easily, but then after
Mm.
I had testosterone, it just didn't happen anymore and I was much more stable.
Yeah. I think just for personal reference, I guess, I definitely cried easier as a kid, but at the same time, I cried reasonably easy as a teenager. And to be clear about that, uh, I don't know this to be the case. I have not done blood tests in this capacity, but I'm what, 5'7", 5'6", somewhere between there in terms of height. Like, I was never particularly strong, even when I hit puberty. Like, I wasn't big, I wasn't strong. I wasn't like weedy, but I wasn't like I don't know. Like, I think the gay term is otter. uh, I wasn't obviously strong in the way that men ought be, I guess. I have a suspicion that I may have been insufficiently uh, masculinized, I guess. Potentially on a hormonal level, maybe it's a response thing. And I say that because, you know, ignoring for a moment the fact that I took hormones for 10 years, there's still the fact that I have a way lower count than I should, to a degree that may actually be because there was an issue all along in terms of insufficiency.
Yeah. Although
At the
it's
same time, though, this also just
you were on it
validates
10
the
years
story
though.
that I have. Yeah, that too. But it also just validates the story that I have in my own head. And so it would be really cool if that were true. And I have no way of disproving it. So, yeah, that could just be internal spin.
Yeah, I find that like understanding autogynephilia really helps uh keep some of that internal spin in check in terms of like
Yeah.
when it's happening, sort of
Mm.
seeing that it's happening and sort of counteracting it to stay rational.
Yep. Yep. That's a huge part that has been super positive to me about just learning as much as I can about my experience and others with it in order to do those comparisons. And having the terms for stuff to be able to say, oh, it is this behavior is something that could be categorized under, auto heterosexuality of some kind to this degree, using this framing, view what is being thought in this lens, see how much more sense it makes, test it against, other outcomes. It's a very important tool that people have, and that if they don't have, can lead them to some very strange places that can make very strange decisions about ones that are not helpful to them or others.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to have the concept of autogynephilia or autoheterosexuality because when you want to be the other sex, instead of thinking of it in the trans ideology way of like actually you just have an inner female essence and you were supposed to have been born that way, it,
Mm,
instead thinking of it as like, okay, I have an atypical kind of male heterosexuality that makes me want this thing. It kind of like takes away a lot of the sting.
mm, yeah, it's the female essence theory, I guess. Is that Julia Serrano, or does it predate them? I don't
uh
actually know
I think I don't know who came up with that label. I
who
know
coined it
Blanchard
initially.
used it in a 2005 paper talking about the history of the concept of
Mm,
autogyne, or maybe it wasn't that paper, but I think he had a paper on debunking the female essence narrative.
yeah, yeah. Like, maybe I'm just talking completely out of line here, but there's an amount of female essence uh, theory that's present in, I think, the idea of two spirit individuals, insofar as, you know, two spirits, one of which being female, one of which being male, occupying the same body.
Yeah. No, I do think that sort of idea is I've seen in quite a few narratives of AGPs and AAPs that they sort
Mm,
of um, they'll have either separate male and female selves that are part of their like collective whole, or like as a kid
Yeah.
they'll have, say, like an imaginary cross-gender twin
Mm.
partner that is like sort of their male or female version, and they sort of have this internal relationship with that internal self. Yeah, it does seem that the idea of having both a male and a female self or side to yourself is something that the auto heterosexuals sort of independently arrive at.
Yeah, it seems like it's an easy conclusion to come to on your own. Just with the feelings as they are, trying to make sense of them. This seems to be a common conclusion that people can come to without input from others.
Yeah, it's like the way of making the only way that they can think to make sense of it. Like, why do I
Mm,
sometimes feel male and sometimes feel female, and like maybe want to be the other sex, but like also still kind of see that I'm actually more like my sex, and it's having that sort of like internal two selves or two spirit thing. It just is intuitive to a lot of them.
mm, yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of like the
The
non-binary thing too,
Yes, it seems to be related in that way, or at the very least, the gender
or,
fluid, I
or
guess.
by gender people.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these different labels for like what is probably ultimately the same psychological condition.
Yeah, just yeah, different phenotypes, different expressions of the same underlying spectrum, rather spectrum meaning intensity spectrum of thing that
Yeah,
could be happening. Yeah.
yeah, or even not even different phenotypes, but just different interpretations of the same phenotype. A lot of the time, you know that like someone
I
may
guess I'm I
have.
guess I'm speaking of mental phenotype.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I
Like
got you.
I'm using phenotype in a mimetic evolution capacity as opposed to a genetic evolution capacity.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It's when you when did you first come across the concept of autogynephilia?
Excellent question. That was when I think it was shortly involved in middle school, when I was like getting into pornography. It was pretty close in and around there because when you're on hentai websites, as opposed to say I, uh, regular websites, when you're on hentai websites, it's a very big thing to have extremely detailed long lists of tags to detail like specific potential fetish interests, or you know, even just like scene elements where it's just like there'll be a tag for, man in background. It's just any image that you see in which there's a man in the background has a tag that says man in background. Like it's really specific, and even in non-sexual ways. Plenty of sexual ways, but also lots of non-sexual ways. And through that, I noticed that there's a tag for, I think it was she-male at the time, is probably what it was labeled as. At which point I stumble across that and I go, "Oh, that's interesting." Like, I guess kind of like how I feel like I could be, because I knew that I couldn't be female in like the full sense. That was just something that was blatantly obvious to me, and I don't think I've ever been of any misconception that I'm not going to be male and that I'm going to be female somehow.
Yeah,
But when
why
I
do you
saw
think
the
that
idea
was?
of which, sorry.
Oh, like why do you think that was that you were never under the illusion that you could become female and that you were kind of grounded in reality?
So one of the first things that struck me about that I knew when I was looking at the concept of transgenderism and autogynephilia and like anything in that vicinity, the idea of trying to change one's sex or feeling like you're a different sex, is I actually came across vaginoplasty, like the surgery, on I think Wikipedia, like fairly early on in that process, because I thought, like very simply, my brain just sort of went, oh, this is a thing that can exist, and this is a thing that I could be. How do I go about that? What's available? This is a surgery that's available for that in regards to the genital department. And then as I was reading about that, I went, oh, this is fake. And when I say fake, I mean it does not give you a functional reproductive female system that can conceive and become pregnant and give birth with. To that degree, I went, oh, well, like I'm not a very half measures kind of person. And so the idea that realizing that, oh, this is a half measure made me go, therefore it's not real. Therefore, I don't want that part because it's a half measure.
Yeah. And when you did you come sorry I interrupted you when you were explaining how you first came across the concept of
So okay.
autogynephiliia. Like when you came across it, like
Mm.
how did you like how was it portrayed and like how did you feel about it?
Oh, I absolutely, when I encountered it first, thought of it in the sense of like this is a creepy thing. Like it was the sort of Jerry Springer, like weird tranny kind of like this is a creepy person who likes things in a creepy way and they are to be shamed and it's like a bad thing for you to be. Yeah. That was definitely my introduction to it. And that only got way worse as I became more inculcated in essentially online internet feminism of the time. Uh, Particularly like I had I had some fairly prominent, well received posts in around 2013 and 14 on r/ask transgender on Reddit. And because I was just very, very big on being correct about the medicalization process, doing it as safely as possible, doing it as effectively as possible, being realistic about it. And that got me fairly upvoted at the time. People seemed to really appreciate that. Uh, like I was gifted Reddit gold by somebody at the time because they thought this is an extremely good post, and have this like token of reward or something for doing so. I felt good about that at a time, and then the I think in 2014 though I ended up being banned from Ask Transgender with no warning, mind you. This was just sort of an immediate,
Yeah,
like,
that's how it
reflexive
goes.
decision. Yeah, in which the thread was about: is it transphobic to have a genital preference? And I said something to the effect of, I have been in bars before in which men have come on to lesbians saying something to the effect of, you gals are just confused. You would think differently about men and about my dick if you just had a little bit of my magic dick. Like that kind of sleazy vibe. And I said, this is what's happening when trans women are saying, suck the dick, bigot. Like, this is the same thing. This is the sleazy guy who comes up to the lesbians and says, you just don't know you like dicks. You really do, because once you have my magic dick, you'll change completely. Like, I was seeing that same thing play out, and I was trying to make that comparison, having literally witnessed the former in person at least once before. And that was the instant ban that I got.
Yeah. No, that's I understand why you got an instant ban for that. That goes
Yeah, in
against
hindsight, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. Obviously you shouldn't be banned for that because it's reasonable, but also
Yeah.
it's totally understandable.
It destroys the fantasy. Like it's incompatible with the fantasy.
Yeah. With did you have a lot of experience on the scene on Reddit?
I would say yes. That was probably one of my bigger interfaces with the trans community, though at the same time, like I did have furries locally who were also trans themselves that I knew in person. But online, it was mostly like Reddit, I guess, early on.
Yeah, you've probably seen me like critique the Reddit trans scene a lot, where I often critique how it sort of funnels people into thinking that transition is the default normal thing. Like someone will
Mm,
ask, "Am I trans?" and they'll describe a
yep.
bunch of autogynephilic ideation, and then get told by all the respondents that like I've had those thoughts and feelings too, and
Mm,
um, I'm not saying you're trans, but that sounds very trans, you know, and
yep.
it sort of like it shunts people into that pathway without sort of telling them the truth.
Yeah. Or more specifically, like the whole truth. Like there's an amount of truth to that. What's missing though is trans people are people who choose to transition. I personally think that's the correct way to look at it. Um, I think being trans is something that you do, not something that you are. Something that you are is gender dysphoric and or gender non-conforming, or autoheterosexual. Like these are things that people are, but trans is a thing that you do. And people are given trans as the only thing that you can do about the former three things.
Right. Yeah. There's like sort of the prescribed course of action,
Mm,
and it's based in the idea that you have this internal trans essence.
mm. Or at the very least, you have something about you innate, whether it's a trans essence or not. It's just something that means that the only logical thing for you to do from this point is to transition.
Yeah. And
Mm.
did you how did your experience with being like a Reddit poster in the trans subreddits evolve over time?
When I was banned in 2014, I think it was 2014, sorry, the I mostly swapped to lurking on and occasionally posting in a subreddit called r/Will Powers, or is it Dr. Will Powers? I forget his
Right. Yeah, I know which one you're talking
thing.
about.
Yeah. Uh, who, by the way, probably the most Chad man that I know. Like, Dr. Will Powers is, to my understanding, an absolutely amazing, brilliant mind that I think the world would do better with having more of. So I hope he has kids. Please have kids. Uh, and I think that he does really good work. The Will Powers subreddit though, also just the name Will Powers, the
It's a very based name. It's
it's
great.
so good. Like he gets in
Yeah.
trouble all the time for having the right opinions about things, in my estimation. But he's also very like he'll apologize for things that he doesn't need to just because he doesn't like upsetting people, and that's completely fine. Like I don't have any issue with him doing that. But it's point is he's a family medicine doctor in the US who has a particular interest in doing well by the gay and lesbian as well as trans communities through doing good medical stuff for them in terms of he actually keeps good data. He tries new things. Uh, he individualizes his medicine for his patients. He doesn't just give them like blanket prescriptions based on broad guidelines. Um, yeah, he's just if all trans medicine looked like what Will Powers is doing, I would have a completely different opinion of it. But it's not that.
Yeah. No, I also kind of think he's one of the best clinicians for the reasons you mentioned. Like he's just
Mm,
he seems very informed and open-minded, and he really seems to tailor his treatment to each of the patients. And I like that he's just creative and just trying things. Whereas like if we have just hundreds of clinicians just following a standard protocol and giving everyone the same thing and not knowing why they're doing it, we're not going to learn nearly as fast as if we have some of these like mad scientist types that
Mm.
are willing to try new things.
Yeah, there's definitely. It makes me wonder what the point of informed consent is if the only thing you can consent to is the W path, like the one thing. It's sort of, and then we don't even take data to it, like not anywhere near the degree that we should. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's one of my concerns with transition, that it's not being centrally tracked, especially when they transition minors, because it's like
Yeah.
it, the only way to find out if this is good medicine on the whole is to track everyone and not just the people that say they liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I will note that I haven't been to any medical appointment in relation to anything to do with being trans in quite some time, obviously. And I haven't been followed up with, you know, like I haven't said anything to them about it because I'm frankly embarrassed. Like I do feel guilty for what I've done to myself generally. At the same time, I was literally a child when I got inculcated first with the culture and then, you know, pursued medical transition. So
Why do you feel
it's a
guilty about it?
it's like I owe myself to have done better, I guess. Like it's a sort of, man, I really wish what I now know about myself and what I find intrinsically valuable in the world and what my objective function is and how I'm trying to go about that. I really wish I knew a lot more of that before because I would be a lot further along in making the world a better place. Yeah, so it's like it's guilt from the perspective of just acknowledging where my life has gone off the rails in terms of what it is that I actually think is worth achieving with my life.
And is that because it interfered with the reproductive, your desire to reproduce?
So that partially, but that's kind of a minimal aspect for me at this point because, as I said, as it turns out, IVF is actually possible for me to do. So we're pursuing that. So that's like, okay, cool. It's more that I spent like 10 to 15 years in this culture not being a useful, productive, evolving member of society. Like the time loss and the specifically pivotal late teenage, and like young adult years that I lost are far more valuable. Yeah.
Right, because like those are the years when you can kind of experiment and have a lot of time to try new things when you're not like
Yeah.
constrained by other obligations,
Yeah.
and to have sort of
And
your
like
sexual
joint
impulse
pain.
channeled into something like that, it it kind of seems like a dead end in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it is. It's very Darwin Award, essentially. It's like my understanding of the Darwin Awards concept is like it doesn't just pertain to people who manage to accidentally off themselves. It also pertains to people who accidentally castrate themselves because inherent to the Darwinian process is in fact the reproductive aspect. And so like I'm looking at these people going, yeah, I get off to the idea of, you know, being feminized. And it's like, yeah, I get that. On some level, I get that. I've been there. Um, I, we probably have slightly different reasons or at least different weightings as to why we're into it in that way. But nonetheless, I get it, I guess. But castrating yourself over it is self-defeating in a lot of ways. Like self-defeating both for yourself as an organism, but also for the fact that it's definitely going to decrease your sex drive and you'll find it less appealing having done it once you've done it.
Right. Like that won't happen necessarily all the time, but I've
Yeah.
seen plenty of
Yeah.
anecdotes where that does happen, where someone will get
Mm.
orchiectomy and they'll be like, "Why the hell did I do this?"
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even just in the hormone taking, like sex drive suppression via hormone taking, um, like can have a similar effect. Certainly not to the strict permanency of orchidectomy, but nonetheless.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing. And Lawrence sort of writes about the sort of
Mm.
that in her book briefly, where the an AGP will go on estrogen and then wonder why they're even doing it. They don't even feel like they want to be a
Mm.
woman anymore, and then go off of it,
Yeah.
and then the desires
Yeah.
return, and they'll go back and forth several times.
Yep. Yep. See, there's an amount of like this lends further to the idea that I probably had some level of testosterone or masculinization deficiency as a child and teen. That I didn't have that because now that I have a testosterone level that has returned. It's not to the degree that it, you know, ought be, but it's certainly within the minimum level of an expected range for a modern man of my age, which is, it is what it is. The I don't have an exceptional desire to transition that I did from before. Mind you, my culture is very different and my goals are a lot more defined, but I'm not getting that sort of deep self-hatred and wanting to be female and hating being male that I used to have anymore. Uh, it's again impossible for me to tell you what weighting every aspect has played in the lessening of that dysphoria, but nonetheless, yeah, I would expect more of a sort of I hate being masculine to come back in stopping hormones and in having a testosterone level return and that kind of thing. But I haven't had too much of that.
Yeah, it'll probably sort of be more noticeable after 5 or 10 years because just masculinization seems to accumulate, and so it might
Mm,
just take a while because you kind of stopped that when you were very much in like a twink era, so to speak.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
It's certainly possible. I mean, my strategy for that, just broadly speaking, is again, I want to become a parent and like we can go further into this if we want. I would really like to. I think that pronatalism advocacy is
I
a
was
really, really big
I
thing
was
for
just
me.
about to ask you about pronatalism because I could pick up on that theme that you were
Oh yeah.
pretty into pronatalism.
Did the Darwinian thing trip you?
No, it was earlier when you were mentioning it like reproducing in relation to civilizational decline.
Oh
I was like
yeah.
I was
Okay.
like,
Yeah.
"Okay," because
Obvious.
like, yeah, I think pronatalism is cool too, and so
Yeah.
I'm pretty
I want to
familiar with that.
clarify for the
Yeah.
audience. Um, the kind that I'm interested in is like voluntary pronatalism. Like I'm not here to force people to reproduce like some sort of dictator that needs to like see numbers go up sort of thing. That's not my angle at all. It's more like I want to help the people who want to reproduce to do so.
Yeah. And how how did you get interested in pronatalism?
So like I think what it begins with for me is at least partially I had a like an early 2017-ish Jordan Peterson arc in which like listening to his Bible lectures, I say Bible lectures, more like Bible study examination stuff, and then just other stuff that he'll say about like how his family has meant to him and how that like connects him to the society and how like young men are not getting into these kinds of relationships and it's showing in the it's having impacts in the way that they act. And then the same is true for women, but he talks mostly to men because that's mostly his audience. It made me start thinking about, like, do you remember before when I was saying that I couldn't imagine myself as a man when I was 30, let alone 40, 50,
Yeah.
etc. I couldn't imagine myself as female at 30 or 40 or 50, etc. I didn't have a future that I was thinking about or invested in. That wasn't obvious to me at the time because I just thought, oh, it doesn't matter. I'll just be female and then, or as best I can, and then the rest of it will work itself out. As it turns out, that doesn't happen if you can't be pregnant. So, like, super short sighted, very teenage, that took me in at that level. Jordan Peterson's lectures helped me realize that I was headed in a very, very bad way if I didn't do something about it now. And that's not because of transitioning strictly, it's because of the things that I'm not doing. Like, I'm not investing in a career, I'm not investing in a relationship, I'm not investing in lasting community, I'm not investing in cultivating some sort of culture that is literally sustainable, like literally reproductive. And if I'm not doing that, then unfortunately time doesn't just stop. And so, like, time plus stagnation equals decay. There is a minimum level of progress that you need to be making in order to stay stable. Like, that's like life is a treadmill, and eventually you'll get too weak to outrun it and it'll throw you off the other end. That's just how existence works. That's true of cultures, that's true of individuals. Um, it made me realize things aren't going to stay the same because they can't. They have to be reproductive. They have to be progressing in some capacity. And I'm not doing that. And so if I value what it is that I'm doing and it's not successful long term, then I either have to be A, self destructive and accept that, or I have to realize that what I'm doing is wrong and change it. And I eventually fell on the latter end, that what I'm doing is wrong and I have to change it.
Was it? Would you say that um, listening to Jordan Peterson was like one of the like major turning points in terms of like changing your ideology?
I think so. There's like a lot of contentions that I have with him nowadays. And uh I don't even know how to speak to all that. It's just a mess. But like his early messages are still very solid in a way where there's a story that he cries about every time he tells it, in which he speaks about it's wild just how many young men have never heard a single positive, well intentioned compliment toward them in their whole life, essentially. And just how powerful it can be to give that. And by him getting up on stage or making videos and doing that, like, there's people that are so hungry for that. It's like all they need to turn their whole life around is for someone to say, actually, you can be good. If you try, you can be good. And that will be good. And you should feel proud about that, or you should feel happy about that. It's like, if that's all it takes for so many men to just flourish, how sad is it that that's not happening?
Yeah, no, it is sad, and I think it's unfortunate, sort of what feminism has done to how we like raise boys and talk about
Mm,
men and boys, where
yeah.
it can be
To be
like
clear,
the
not all feminism, but yeah.
right, yeah, no, when I say feminism, like obviously there's
I
many
know what you
schools of
mean by
it.
it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good point, clarifying for the audience, but just in the last 10 to 15 years in particular, you get boys that they go through public school where they pretty much have all female teachers
Mm.
that tend to be liberal leaning, and they
Potentially
sort of
to single
y-
mothers.
right, and they sort of like get the implicit message that being how they are naturally is bad or wrong, and
Or
they shouldn't.
insufficient.
Right, yeah, that they just don't measure up, and I think it doesn't give them like a way to feel like proud about who they are, and to feel like that their life is worthwhile and that there's a way forward for them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no good role models to demonstrate viable pathways. It's really hard to come up with, like, what is it? On average, any new idea is almost definitely a bad idea. And the reason for that is it's really, really easy to be wrong comparatively to how it is to be right, because there is a near infinite amount of ways to be wrong comparatively to how many there is to be right. So coming up with new ideas that are good, very hard. That's true of role models. If you don't have good role models that you could actually see yourself embodying and be able to pursue, coming up with them yourself like whole cloth, really hard. It's especially when you are an inexperienced young child.
Yeah, and I do think that the sort of I feel that in my generation, the older generations didn't really do a good job of like preparing us for the expectation of having kids. It was just sort of
Mm,
the feeling was, oh, we'll just let them be who they are and they'll figure it out. But
yeah.
then when we were just left to all our own devices, a lot of us went down sort of pathways that weren't productive in the end, and
Mm,
not following the timeless values of reproducing and basically not breaking the chain that connects you to your ancestors.
yeah. Like, I want to clarify on this one as well. This is, I think, Ayan Hirsi Ali has said to the effect of, like, the West is a cut flower culture or a cut flower civilization, meaning like it's been removed from its connection to its roots. And to that degree, it looks pretty, but it's like rotting because it has no means with which to continue. Um,
Yeah,
that
that's
se-
a good metaphor.
that seems to describe the cultural disconnect that you're talking about, in which there's been generations in which they just went, oh, they'll figure themselves out eventually, and it's like, no, 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 you're the roots. You're actually meant to provide the nutrients, and when you're not doing that, it just it just rots.
Yeah, and
And then they have the audacity to say, "Where's my grandkids?" But that's a different thing.
right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
I have funny conversations with like my dad say nowadays where he'll say like, it'd be really good if you had kids, and I'm like, yeah, I know. Really should have done that earlier, right? You would have been really good for you to for me to hear this from you like 10 years ago. But still,
or even
like
just as like
we joke about
before
it
puberty.
nowadays. Yeah, before puberty, for sure. Like having the idea of, like, I know some people are going to react to this thinking like, no, I was encouraged, quote, encouraged. I was shamed at the idea of not having kids before puberty. And it was this huge expectation that felt unachievable. And the economy and the environment and that kind of stuff has kept me from it. And the shame has doubled down my inability and that sort of thing. I'm amenable to that. That's absolutely a thing that can happen to people in their mindsets. But the solution is not never talk about it. It's not a real thing. And then when it is suddenly a real thing, it's mostly as a why haven't you done this yet? And then like no excuse is good enough. And it's often too late to get started for a lot of people. Not just because getting pregnant would be hard, but because like may- maybe you don't even have a partner yet.
Right. Yeah. Well, there is like there there's this sort of like DIY approach to reproduction now where there's like these Facebook groups where like usually sperm donation has usually been done through institutions and such,
Oh, yep,
but
I've
those
seen
aren't
this.
everywhere. Yeah, and so there's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Facebook groups where you can just there's women
Hireable.
that are looking for sperm, and then there's guys that are looking to donate sperm, and people are
Donate.
just sort of informally doing this without going through any institutions.
Yep. I mean,
So
good
I
on
figured
them
I'd mention that
on
for
some
anyone
level.
in the audience that isn't gonna be, say, like reproducing with like a mate or getting married or something.
Yeah, yeah. And if you don't have, say, the finances to access the clinical channels.
Right, yeah. It's it's a pretty crazy scene on there. Um,
Yeah. Like at the end of the day, my stance on this is I think it is better that a person exists that could have than them not. So to that degree, do I think it's a particularly responsible thing from the parents' perspective for a bunch of, you know, like femcel self-identifying women to go and pursue back channel semen donation in order to have kids of their own? Uh, I don't think it's a particularly responsible thing to do. However, I wouldn't see the real human being that results from such a decision as any less human or worthy of like equal human consideration. Like I think it's good that that person exists. I don't think that they're a mistake that should have never happened. You know what I mean?
yeah, that even if it's not an ideal way of going about it, what's important is that
Mm.
the person gets to exist.
Yeah, it's like with the like if you ask, most people are happy enough with their life. Most people that um like it's really rare that you get people who think that I should have never been born, like the antinatalist kind of position or one of the antinatalist positions. And like there was a point at which I felt that. And I felt that because, you know, the idea that I was male and that the only way that I could have not been male is to have never been born. And so antinatalism made sense in that context to me. But there's a kind of, it's just people should, nobody is lesser for the nature of their coming into being. Exactly. Like there's a level of consideration that is a minimum that we owe to other, essentially to other intelligences, I suppose, agentic intelligences. That's just that's my position on it, at least.
Yeah, what got you into pronatalism?
Okay. I can try to be brief with this, but essentially, it's the realization that if I care truly about the things that I say that I care about, like the moral values that I care about, the things that I think are good in life, and that it's good that they exist and that there should be maybe more of it and that it should be sustainable and protected. What I realize from that is I have a duty to ensure that that happens. Like, who am I to go, who am I to enjoy the fruits of something and then like not assist in its sustainability, its reproduction? It it strikes me as extremely selfish in a way that I don't actually value these things. I just value what they can do for me. What I value is me at that point. I value the other things because they benefit me. I don't actually value them. The That never sat well with me as something that ought to be like of moral value, of priority. So that's when I realized that sustainability and reproducibility is an essential part of what is good, because again, it cannot be good if it cannot sustain itself, if it is not reproductive. I realized, okay, one, I have to try and have kids, which is a big part of why I need to try and have kids because I think that good things need to continue and I need to do my part of that. That's like a duty that I have. But then I I realized that that applies to civilization itself. Like I cannot appreciate the civilization that I'm in, and like there are parts that I don't appreciate about it. Obviously, I don't think it's flawless, but like if I like good things and want good things to continue so that myself and other people, both separately from me in the current and in the future, can appreciate them, I need to help sustain them. And the first way you do that is by literally reproducing. The second way you do that is by culturally reproducing. So if I'm not participating in that game, I'm essentially a slacker that is either parasitically immorally consuming from a thing that I'm depleting and not actually helping, and thus I'm not actually good at all. I'm just parasitizing it. Or I'm like ignorant about it, and that now that I know better, I should change. They're the two things. I'm either bad or I should change what I'm doing, which seems to be a running theme in my life, given that also happened with like the whole I should be female because male is bad. I don't want to be male. The only things left are to either accept that I'm bad and that I'm male, or change, be female. It's like the same thing has happened again, where I'm either part of the solution or part of the problem, and I've decided I should be part of the solution.
Yeah, I think that's some pretty solid reasoning.
Mm.
I'm also pretty sympathetic to pronatalism, and the fact that it's kind of like you mentioned it being like parasitic, kind of to like not reproduce or like to like enjoy the fruits of civilization, but not to continue to its furtherance.
Yeah,
Um,
or at the very least, replace yourself.
right.
Like,
It,
make equal contribution from what you take. I mean,
yeah, like both genetically and memetically.
yeah, yeah. And like some people are unable to contribute culturally, and some people are unable to contribute genetically due to factors completely outside of their control. And like, fair enough. That's not they are therefore lesser in that way. It's more that what is it? It's like the Spider-Man thing of like, with great power comes great responsibility. It's like, I mean, actually, we can even go to marks from each according to their abilities, to each according their needs. It's like, I have this capacity to give back, ergo, I ought.
Yeah. No, I think there's something to that. That that famous Spider-Man quote
Mm.
with like with mimetic contributions, there's only a single digit percent of the population that realistically can make solid mimetic contributions.
Mm.
Um,
I would, I have to push back on that, but I don't need to do
yeah,
so
go for it.
immediately. Okay. Um, like, I guess we're going to talk about spirits at this point. Like, it'll be, I don't mean in a religious perspective. I mean, well, it's partially religious, but that's just because I'm schizophrenic enough that it's all connected to me. It's, you know, the phrase like school spirit, like the sort
No,
of, okay. So the idea being like crowds of people can move and act in a way as if they're one, in a way where it's sort of how birds fly. Like, have you seen birds fly in a formation?
oh, is this like the egregore concept?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it's egregore. Yeah, yeah. Essentially that. Like, you are technically correct in saying that one person, that the average, not even the average person, the overwhelming individual person is not going to have meaningful impact on culture. That is correct. However, that's also not the point, because the point is that you have collective impact on culture, and every single point in that counts. Like, it's the same logic behind, oh, I didn't vote because my vote's just one, so it doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, but a lot of one votes is a lot of votes. You know, every vote, uh, every every voting body is a collection of individual votes. That's true of you as a cultural unit as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I hear what you're saying, where it matters sort of like what the whole school of fish is doing, so to speak, and that makes an impact.
Hmm.
Um, ev- I guess I was originally thinking of it in terms of like the people that create the new memes, and are the biggest spreaders of them are disproportionately people on the right tail end of the intelligence curve. Um,
Yes, that's definitely true. The people that create them, for sure. I don't think that's actually the people that spread them. I think it's actually two separate things.
right. Yeah. No, that's definitely a good point. And
Hmm.
also the that same thing you were talking about the collective thing mattering. It
Hmm.
would also apply in the genetic realm as well,
Um,
where it's like there's
yeah.
no very few men are going to have 1,000 kids, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone is just having a few. So it,
Hmm. In fact,
yeah,
most men don't reproduce. Most women do.
yeah. I'm glad that women continue to do that because it's good for people to exist.
It's foundational. Like
Yeah,
everything that is good about existence and society is literally impossible without the labor that women perform. It's fact of, you know, like the society that we have in many ways probably wouldn't exist if not for men, but existence wouldn't exist if not for women. They are foundational.
yeah. No, you're correct on that front.
Mm. They deserve a lot more respect for that than they get given by the average man on the internet nowadays.
Yeah. No, and I think it's good to, yeah, to attribute status and importance to the role of mother,
Yeah,
so
and
that,
I don't even
yeah,
strictly mean like biological mother either, mind you. I think there ought be status to the position of parent, like on whole. Um, like I guess I'm talking about like adopting and fostering in this case, but then also I guess somewhat through teaching roles, like early life education roles as well.
yeah, like all of like elementary school teachers.
Yeah, my the teachers that I learnt the best from and that I was the most engaged in my learning with were my male teachers. You know, I wish there were more of those. I had two, which is probably two more than most people will have.
You talking about like throughout all of primary school?
Mm,
Yeah, I think there was like one or two in my whole primary school. It was like
yeah.
yeah, all of it was otherwise just all women. And
Yeah.
yeah, I wonder what that does to the to boys to have that sort of environment.
I'm sure there's a lot of things that it could do. The main the main thing is the teaching style is definitely not going to be compatible with the most boisterous boys.
Right. Yeah.
Um, sorry, in regards to the pronatalism thing as well, I just while I'm still thinking about it, the not only do I think that it's of moral foundation rather, to reproduce culturally and genetically, not because my genes are inherently important, but because literal additional human beings are important. Um, like again, adopting and fostering is a great thing, and I think it's what people should do. I plan to do it, like as I get older and age out of the ability to produce my own. Um, the it's also a case of I think the average cultural fidelity rate is something like 70% ish. Like 70-ish% of people in a Western nation retain largely the culture that they're born into. I couldn't give you the where I got that from off of my top of my head. It's just the number that I have floating around in there at the moment. Meaning that if your culture and your family, the combination thereof, is insufficiently reproductive, is having less than 2 kids on average, then that means that over time its population will reduce and will eventually disappear. And the reduction is exponential because, one generation having less it's a sort of reverse compound interest that brings things to near zero very quickly. And that it means that of the 30% that leave their birth culture, if the culture they're leaving to has an even lower birth rate than the one that they were born into, it means that any of the reasons that they left their culture, their birth culture for, because either they were against particular things or they were rejected on certain fronts or they had things they wanted to improve that they couldn't improve within their birth culture, so they left to pursue them elsewhere. Unfortunately, none of the things that they're leaving for matter when the culture that they left to go join instead self-extinguishes.
Are you referring to the trans culture?
There's a lot that this actually applies to. But yes, it applies to any version of cultural sterilization. Like any culture that, by being part of, has a behavior set and a value set that you adopt that makes you reproductively inert, essentially, cultural sterility. The effect is the same. And the effect is that culture and its people stop existing. It's just, it's the cut flour analogy again. It's if what you are doing is not reproductively sustainable, then it doesn't matter. And that's like a really harsh pill to swallow. But I think that it's just true. If what you believe is not sustainable, then it won't matter. And I don't mean to you and your feelings in the moment and maybe even your lifetime. I mean, say in 100 years' time, the only groups that are still reproducing are fringe weirdos of all kinds. Like you have religious kinds that are very traditionalist and segregationalist, and then you have like other super high tech, like mega autists who are just like doing it because their special interest is reproduction and pregnancy or something.
Yeah.
Like we'll get to a world state where they are the only groups that are sustaining their population level, let alone increasing. And so, congratulations, all of the things that you thought were important and are of moral value and that you wanted to see more of in the world, there's none of that anymore. It's actually all gone because you're all gone. And anyone who joins you because they think your cause is good, you culturally sterilize them because your culture sterilizes functionally the people who join it, sometimes literally, but often just behaviorally. It's just, it's really simple to me at this point. It's just, if what you value is of real value, it must be sustainable. If it's not sustainable, either accept that what you're doing is unsustainable or change what you value and what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that the progressive urban monoculture is very much something that is kind of a dead end, that it's leading to people to not reproduce.
Yeah, there's to be clear, there's a lot of things doing that. It's not unique to the urban monoculture. The urban monoculture just happens to be the most prominent example because it's currently in most of the levers of power.
Right. Yeah. I have a similar intuitions with you in terms of just the inevitability of if there's a group that has below replacement rate fertility, it just the evolutionary logic is it will disappear. And I think that if people have political projects they want to bring about and they care about, they have to start thinking about whether it they have to start thinking in terms of like helping does it help humans reproduce or like does it interfere with that?
Hmm. Yeah. Or maybe not even does it help humans reproduce? Maybe just let's just start with, does it interfere with humans reproducing?
Yeah. And I do think that like architecture wise, just everyone trying to live in cities where you don't have a lot of space, it's like no surprise that people aren't choosing to have big families when they're like struggling to afford like a two-bedroom apartment or something, you know?
I have to push back on this one actually, because
Yeah, go
we
for it.
see we see cultural groups that exist in big cities, in areas where rent is extremely expensive and like the cost of living is really high, that are above replacement rate and that are doing so sustainably. This is mostly Jewish communities.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're talking about like the Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, like if some people can do it, then cool. Those are all that are going to exist in 1,000 years. Like it's just like obviously there's other things that could happen between now and then in terms of like geopolitical status and technology collapse and stuff like that. Obviously things like that could happen, but it's the fact that some people are doing it and they've been doing it for quite a while, like tens of generations, says to me that this is actually possible. It's just that we aren't willing to do it for some reason. So we should investigate what those reasons are.
Yeah, I kind of just think like technology itself doesn't necessarily want us to reproduce too much. Um, and I realize I'm talking about technology as if it's like an independent agent, but
Mm,
like, have
mm,
you ever read Jacques Ellul?
no.
Like that? Yeah, he was like a French philosopher that he also inspired Ted Kaczynski a lot with his like anti-technology stance. But
Oh yeah.
basically, the technological system itself is kind of it acts of its own accord, and it shapes humans.
It's an
It
egregore.
shape right, like it shapes us in whatever way will help it flourish.
Mm,
And
yep. It's like
um,
parallel mimetic reproduction.
yeah, like and the memes are winning over the genes right now, and that's kind of the problem, just
Mm,
because of how
they're-
fast they reproduce.
yeah, yeah. The technology on a whole has been too focused on we've been too focused on how we can serve technology as opposed to how technology can serve us.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's not that technology is bad, it's that what we've been doing with it is to serve it for its sake, almost like an artistic pursuit, like a sort of like in the way that a prolific painter or exhibitor would like, spend years of their life making these extravagant, super amazing, very beautiful works of art. It's like we're doing that with technology. And like, is it beautiful to look at? Yeah, I think so. I definitely think. Is it enjoyable? Absolutely. Does it serve any reproductive function? Is it sustainable? No. um, that's kind of fine if somebody wants to dedicate their own life personally to doing that, but we're doing that as a collective, like as a species.
Yeah, it's worrying. I think ultimately it's gonna work out in the end, but like right now we're at kind of a
Mm,
scary moment with the population.
yeah,
Um, at
I think
least,
it'll work out as well.
yeah, even if it is only that the world becomes half Amish, or you know,
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I mean, like we've went through genetic bottlenecks before as a species. This is not something that we haven't gone through before. And if we have to go through it again, kind of so be it.
Yeah, it's strange though that historically the bottlenecks were usually
Ice
disease
ages.
and war and famine, but
Mm.
today it's just we like looking at the internet too much and don't want to date and reproduce.
To be clear, that's war would actually be part of that.
How so?
It's social relations related. It's social technology related, like competing human cultural interests. Like that's war is actually a cultural thing in human context.
Okay, you talking like sort of like a fifth generation war sort of thinking where it's about ideas and cultural influence and not just violence.
It's definitely not just violence for violence sake.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just think that natural disasters should not be put in the same category as war. I think war is closer to technology in terms of uh, a category of causal factors because it is in fact man-made in a way that is very man.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that it's kind of propelled forward also by the needs of war, with
Yeah,
the like the War
yeah,
Department funding a bunch of
it,
advanced research.
yeah. It's very hand in hand. Like technology, this is just my sort of basic understanding of it. Is like technology is what men do to secure women. That's what technology is, and that's not what exactly what society is because society existed previously to males existing on some like an amount of what is it? Not that bacteria, because I think there's some bacteria that have sexes. I'm not entirely sure of that, but sex is a very, very old thing. What I mean is that society can exist without males, not sustainably, mind you. There's certainly a time in the future where that could be true, like with the advancement of IVG technology, intro vitro gametogenesis, the creation of sperm and egg cells from stem cells converted from like a live adult. That's the thing that could be coming online. But it's that the advancement of things is something that men do to get their pick of more women.
Right, to raise their prestige and
Yeah,
power so that they secure more mates.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they become more deserving of securing either more or better quality mates. Like progress is, it's a weird thing to think about, but like progress is masculine. Like this is actually something that has made me. I feel very different on my maleness. I think in this lens, it's why do I care about this stuff on the level that I do that makes me take these huge risks and change my behaviors in these huge ways? Like, I don't see women doing this a whole lot. And that's not a flaw, that's just a difference. It's a complementary ability. Like, my ability essentially, ability is the wrong word, my proclivity to find righteous causes and self sacrifice myself in pursuit of them is not a flaw. That's a complementary positive to the human species. And it's one that is more often, I believe, much more often, something that men have over women. And I think it's the underlying mechanism that has driven societal and technological advancement. It's a it's a status game. Like men want to get access to more women and more higher status of women or higher quality, I guess. Status less so, more quality in their own personal sense. Um, and so we're just willing to skin ourselves in the pursuit of doing that. Yeah. And that's not and it's not a flaw. It's a complementary ability.
Yeah, it's always interesting to talk to other people that have evolutionary principles deeply embedded in like the foundation of their thinking like this,
Yeah.
because I find that a lot of people haven't truly grokked evolution on a deep level, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Like
it's really
evolution
important
stops at
too.
the neck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think there's definitely super valid criticisms to be said about, say, evolutionary psychology from the perspective of like, there's a lot of just so stories which potentially are unfalsifiable to our best abilities, I guess, because we really don't know that things happened the way that we're postulating they are. We're making assumptions there. It is a just so story. Like, things are this way, therefore this behavior. Like, there is a lot of that goes on. Some of that doesn't exclude them from being correct, though. Even if we can't prove something, doesn't actually mean that it's inherently not correct. That's a really big pitfall that people will jump into a lot of the time. That's where you get people who just like, I need a source for literally everything that I do. I need a peer-reviewed study as to why I should eat cheese. I'll never eat cheese if I don't get a peer-reviewed study that says that it's safe to eat cheese. Like, it's the sort of, you can get into that kind of mindset about it. Having a peer-reviewed study or having solid evidence of something does not having that does not actually mean that it's not good or not true. It just means that you do not currently have the ability to prove it. But moving on from that is the idea that the fundamental, like, Darwinistic sort of, we have the features that we do because they have benefited our ancestors, or at the very least not resulted in them dying. Like, yeah, we are what we are. We have the things that we do because they didn't kill our ancestors and they ideally helped them reproduce, is just true. Like, I don't believe in souls. I don't believe in, like, sort of metaphysical essences in that way. And if I don't bring any of that into it, then there's nothing left other than the fact that we are products of just evolutionary processes, and that's both mentally and physically. There's no actual meaningful separation between those things. Like, the mental is just a function of neurological processes, and those processes are of biological design, again through evolution, and so it's just all like, it's all down from that. Yeah, I can't tell you what the ancestral environments were precisely that led to that selection exactly. That's where the just so story part comes in. But the fact that this is the process that in fact underwent that led us to where we are, I think is indisputable at this stage, unless you take a metaphysical angle.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you on the evolution thing. I think it's obviously true. Um, I was wondering
True
about,
for now.
yeah. You
Yeah.
know what? I don't even need to say it's provisionally true. I, I'm
Okay.
I'm willing to go there.
You're gonna
Um,
die on that hill.
I'm gonna live on that hill.
No,
Uh,
okay.
yeah.
You're gonna you're
Um,
gonna you're gonna kneel before Saint Michael and take the sword like a honorable fellow on that one.
yeah, I'm pretty sure about it.
Yep.
Um,
That's
with
fair.
with respect to it sounds like a lot of why you chose to detransition was related to wanting to reproduce and live a more fruitful life. I'm wondering
Yeah.
if have you thought about um like, do you think in the future, if you say were to have a few kids and decide that you're done having kids, would you go back on estrogen or anything like that?
I would say yes, actually. I would say it's something that I certainly would consider. Um, just because I enjoyed it. Like, self-evidently, I enjoyed it. Like, I still to this day, mind you, like, I have, because I'm not on estrogen, like, my breasts are not as prominent. They're not as flush, I guess, or whatever the appropriate word is. Um, but like, they're still there. They're not huge, but they're still there. And it's something that I don't look at as like, man, it's a shame that I have this, or like, I'm disgusted that I have this, or whatever. Like, no, I still have the underlying, like I'm into this. You know,
Right. Like
it's
that this is a good thing.
yeah, or at the like it attracts me. I don't get sexually aroused seeing myself in the mirror anymore, and I haven't had that for a long time, like since I was 20 at most. Like it very quickly that fell off for me, in a way that has never really come back. And I don't get that now either, but I definitely get the sort of relational warm fuzzies about it when I pay attention to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you think if um basically that you would consider hormones again once it's no longer in like contradiction to your long-term more important pursuits.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way that if I could be somehow guaranteed that drinking a bunch of alcohol wouldn't interrupt my ability to A, have a functioning liver, B, perform the functions that I think I need to in order to live a fruitful life, then I might do that too. But I know that it's incompatible with those things, and so I don't. It's like a very simple logic.
Um if you were to have kids and
Mm.
some of them, one or more of them, like starts having like signs of
Mm.
gender issues, either autoandrophilia or autogynephilia, like
Almost definitely, because the other parent is also a trans parent. They're
right,
getting they're
yeah,
getting
no,
they're getting a they're getting a double dose.
right. I was thinking that it seems that there could be some inevitability to that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I was wondering if you've already thought about how you would want to deal with that.
I think I would just want to be as honest as I can about it in terms of like age appropriateness is a separate question, one that I
Right.
think
Yeah.
gets very, very little attention, and it needs some attention because, like, my autoandrophobia, again, really hard to say chicken or egg kind of scenario about which came first. But if I had been told back then that it's actually okay that you feel that way about yourself and it's going to pass, and it's probably going to pass, and you're going to be able to live a happy and fruitful life in ways that it won't matter to you so much anymore. Like it will lose its sting. Like if I had that explained to me by somebody that I respected and that I trusted, it could have changed a lot. Yeah. That's kind
Yeah.
of the main thing that I think that I would owe my kids. It's not to set them on this path of self-hatred or reinforce this idea that they have to be different in order to be good. And when I say different, I mean to be something that they aren't in order to be good.
Right. Yeah. To basically to transition into another thing
Yeah.
as like the only option.
To be clear, that's literally actually required. You transition into a teenager and then an adult and then into a parent and then into a grandparent. That's actually something that you do. There are life transitions that exist, but you do not, in fact, have to sex transition in order to live a life of value.
Right. I was wondering if um like your default stance towards a kid transitioning would
Mm.
be to be against it just because that would interfere with the reproduction
Yeah, thousand
thing.
percent, 1000%. It's literally just it's you do not get to choose to sterilize yourself as a child. Like that's it. And like not only do you not get to choose that, but anyone that does it to you, like I think it's a sort of like, well, uh, any country that has capital punishment should probably look at executing that person. Like you've committed murder. Like not only have you committed murder on a functional level of one person, but also the exponential number of potential people that they could have went on to have. Like it's a like with every sterilization, a genocide. That's functionally the case across time.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from in terms of it being something that compounds in a negative
Mm,
way.
yeah. And this isn't, I'm not talking about people making that decision for themselves. I have no issue with people, for any reason, including highly sexualized reasons, wanting to castrate themselves. Like, okay, cool. As adults, in your own time, on your own money, not shown to children, encouraged to children, government subsidized to vulnerable people, including children, but also mentally unwell people. Say, like, it's, yeah, there's a very big difference between somebody choosing to do it in a truly informed consent capacity as an adult and everyone that's not that.
Yeah. Do you think it's important for people that are seeking transition? Do you think it's important for them to understand um, the the etiologies of gender dysphoria, like the HSTS and the autosexual types? Like, do you think it's important for them to understand that before making that decision?
Yes, 100%. Um, whether or not the like, I have my doubts as to whether HSTS actually exists.
Right, like in
Uh,
Western countries in the modern day.
yeah, like it definitely makes me think that like that was more a culture bound identity role, I suppose. In the way, mind you, that Iran has had HSTS for quite some time, and the way that they deal with that is they government, and they've been doing it since like what 70s or 80s. They've been transitioning gay men to females so that they can perform female roles, so that they can match their experience to what it is that they want in a way that's compatible with their culture. It's like Iran's transition program to turn gay men into women has is like the original government HSTS initiative, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's like the most extreme example of that.
It is, yeah. It's the most extreme example. It's the most obvious and extreme example that I can think of in terms of like government level programs to like make this change on a societal level and to encourage it as a pathway that is valid for the society.
Okay, so you
Mm.
you are basically skeptical that the HSTS even exists in say like Australia or Western Europe or the US.
Anymore, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess what I'm saying is that I think that it's a cultural phenomena as opposed to one that has a distinct, discrete biological basis. I think it is a solution that is culture bound as opposed to a cause that is biology bound.
yeah, I think that it's obviously it's only going to affect the people that have the biological precursors for it to happen, like let's
Mm,
say like homosexuality with a strong cross-sex shift in personality.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but that it does seem to be basically disappearing. Like
Mm,
when I like try to think of like
people,
contemporary trans
mm,
people that are HSTS, it's really hard for me to think of anywhere I'm like confident that they're not
especially
autogynephilic.
especially because they're all coming out as autogynephilic now.
Well, they're not really coming out as autogynephilic, are they?
Some are like Taftage
Yeah.
and
Well,
Richie.
right. Yeah. It's it is good. I'm glad there's finally some people coming out. And I
Mm,
especially cuz the gender criticals have this idea that this catchphrase of stop transing gay kids.
yeah, yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like it doesn't
That's an
that's
issue.
not what's happening here.
Yeah,
It's like the autoandrophiles and autogynephiles that are getting transed.
yeah. When they say like I don't know if I agree with you on in terms of the numbers, in terms of like the population sizes and which ideology they would belong closer to. on a whole, but I would agree with you certainly that when the GC narrative is run that it's stop transing gay kids and like, or 80 90 something percent of gender non-conforming kids end up being gay adults instead of persistently pursuing gender transition, sex transition. Like, sure, you can say that, but then like that's literally true on an observational outside level, but what could actually just as much be happening is people taking these roles for reasons related to, autoheterosexuality and or just meta attraction generally. Because it's like they take on the role. It's like, oh, these are just gay people. It's like, well, or are they just people who are taking on a gay role because it fulfills an existing thing to them that is not strictly like plain vanilla, ironically, vanilla homosexuality.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that.
They don't know that, and they aren't looking to differentiate it.
Yeah, that. What are we haven't really talked about the gender criticals yet. Do you have thoughts on their movement or like its strengths or its like how you'd like to see them change?
I mean, number one, they're a big force because most successfully reproductive cultures are gender critical. So they're a serious force that you have to take seriously because they will exist in the future. So that's like point number one. Point number two is like, I feel like we were in a better place in the 90s and early 2000s where men could be more feminine and women could be pretty much anything they fucking wanted to be, and it wasn't an issue. And
Yeah.
I think we need to go back toward that more, of people being allowed to express their individuality, not feel so pushed into very specific modes of being that aren't even optimally productive. They're just normative in a way that makes people comfortable with things being the same, I guess, or being super predictable. Like, I think the issue is the categories in those ways. I think that actually also was a contributor to my autoandrophobia, where I was saying that, like, I wasn't going to be, there's no way I could be a man because men are evil. And also, all of the men around me are not something I could stack up to. I'm insufficient anyway. So even if I wanted to be the big bad dominator, I couldn't be because I'm not man enough. I'm not masculine enough mentally or physically. Mind you, mentally, I think that I'm absolutely very man. Just putting that out there at this point. But if I had known that it was possible to be a different kind of man and that other kinds of man existed, that maybe I could have actually just not had to transition at all and wouldn't have, and could have been exposed to the same things. I could have been exposed to internet feminism. I could have been exposed to, progressive movement, furries and trans people and that sort of stuff, and continue to decide, actually, I don't actually need to do this. I have these feelings and I share them with a lot of people that would call themselves trans and who would transition, but I don't need to do this. And there are other things that are important in life and that I can pursue those, and that would be fine. I think that having that exposure early, that my differences are not a flaw, they are perhaps ill fit to the scenario that I'm in, but that I can pursue other scenarios and that my individuality is not inherently wrong or bad, could have made the difference.
Yeah, did you have a lot of like when you got exposed to feminism as a teenager, did it give you like brainworms about like how it's bad to be male because that's oppressive?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And especially because I could see it happening. Do you know what I mean? Like a sort of, it's like you see something happening, but you don't really put it together as a coherent narrative. In the same way, like with autogynephiliia, it's like, and like specifically how autoandrophobia seems to be a strong indicator, not a guarantee, but a strong indicator of autogynephilia. in that, and including like pre-sexual awakening, like to children, you know, who do not have sexual urges yet, who are not deployed in that regard. The the difference is like, damn, I lost it. Sorry, what was the question again?
I often lose trains of thought myself, so it's hard.
Yeah.
Let's
I
see.
apologize for my excessive skits.
No worries. My mind is wonderfully clear and blank.
Smoothed over.
Yeah, the smoothest
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like you had mentioned that, like, a while ago you mentioned that gender critical is a force to be reckoned with because it's just of its evolutionary viability.
Yeah, yeah. Not because it itself is, but because the groups that are succeeding have it.
Right.
Like, I think
Yeah,
ultimately, gender criticality in the way that we currently see it, like the Kelly J. Keane, mind you, Kelly J. Keane doesn't identify as feminist and like will decry it if she's called it in a way where she's noticing it happening. Like she'll say, I'm not a feminist. So like putting that out there.
yeah, I know, but I mean, I guess considering the space I'm in, often I don't like. It's like cool you don't identify as a thing, but I'm still
Yeah.
going to see you as a
Well,
thing.
yeah, it's just like, it's like, but you do that to me all the time. Like, looks like a man, sounds like a man, must be a man. It's like, okay, well, feminist. Like, they do it to you all the time, and then you can't do it. Anyway, that aside, though, I don't think there's. I think that gender criticality in the way that we currently see it, where it's very man hating, is something that will ultimately be self defeating. I think it is actually a reproductive negative. I just think that groups that are reproductively successful just so happen to be so successful that they can afford to be gender critical for now in this environment. I think we'll actually see that recede as the environment changes.
Yeah, I think it'll.
In no small part, mind you, because holding back your men by oppressing the hell out of them is a really good way to be weak when another stronger group comes around and just raids you, pillages you. You don't want your men to be weak. Like, we may very well be entering another stage of human history where open conflict in like a I literally just take what's mine because I'm stronger could be the reality again. That could happen again. And if we enter that world again, any group that has feminized its males will fail because they will just be conquered. And that's just how it is. So, yeah, I don't think that gender criticality, in the way we currently see it, in that sort of man hating strain that is like man hating feminist adjacent, there's like an overlap. I don't think it's successful. I think that any success that any group has that also holds those beliefs is successful in spite of those beliefs, and that it will recede in the long term, either because it has to or because it gets killed.
Yeah, no, I agree that it's kind of like similar to like with the trans ideology. It's kind of like something frivolous we can do now because of our like
Mm,
abundance of
mm,
prosperity,
yeah,
but that it's not something that's stable in the long term.
it's art. It's exactly like, you know, the man who spends his whole life dedicated to producing beautiful artwork. Is it cool? Yes. Is it beautiful? I think so. Is it sustainable? No. Should our entire society be dedicated to doing it? No.
Um,
I like
are
the
there
pink
any other subjects you
band as
want to
well.
touch on before we wrap up?
Let me have a look over my list really quickly.
I feel like you covered your list in the first 10 minutes.
Damn, I might have, yeah. I liked your concept of mental shifts. And I think that this is just sort of like a vague overview thing. A lot of what I was experiencing by doing internet roleplay stuff, like that was mental shifting, like for sure. That's what was
Yeah.
going on there. I just want to like tie that for the audience to say that in your book you cover mental shifts and you tie that to Therians, for example.
Yeah, I that's their term. They created it.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, I want to give the trans species people their credit where it's due. They like their language.
Their
I've found,
technology.
yeah, their linguistic technology is very powerful for understanding autosexual trans identity because like whatever words they have to use, it has to be compatible with a whole bunch of different types of species identities. So it's sort of like it sort of describes the general form of autosexual trans identity, regardless of whether it's transgender or trans race or whatever. It sort of shows you the underlying structure of erotic target identity inversion. And like I've found learning about trans species to be the most illuminating of all the different types of trans.
It cracks open the false boundaries to show you where the real boundaries are, like how the mechanism is actually working at its edges as opposed to the specific outcomes of a given individual.
Yeah, it shows the general structure of it and how it works, and
like
their language about mental shifts, and also their their phantom anatomy, their phantom shifts too.
It's sort of like you know how echolocation with a submarine works. It's like, yes. Do you know how that works? Sorry.
Well, I know how it works in the sense that it
Yeah.
bounces off things.
Right. So
yeah.
I guess the analogy I'm going to make is like, whereas transgender ideology is a relatively weak pulse that is mapping a much closer relation to the human experience in relation to just like the gender sex perspective, the trans species Therian thing from a mental explorations perspective is like an extremely powerful sonar pulse that is finding the actual edges of things because it's intentionally trying to push to the furthest boundary possible to see where they are.
It also has to like whatever language and ideas they come up with, it has to like people that identify as badgers versus lions or snakes, like it has to resonate with all of them for them to agree on that.
Robots and stuff.
Yeah, it like the language has to accord with so many different types of trans identity where like whatever words they can agree upon are basically signaling to you like that there's something real there, something that's actually happening.
Yeah. It's super helpful. Like it's wild, but super helpful. To be clear, I don't think that that's like necessarily maladaptive either. Like just on a really basic level, if I strip this down as much as I can, you must be able to imagine yourself as a better person. Well, I say must, you don't actually have to do this, but it really helps to become a better person to first imagine what kind of better person you could be. Role modeling obviously helps with this because it provides you the example straight up. But if what you're trying to do is create a new type of good, do a new thing, be a new type of better person, that the ability to do that is incredibly valuable. And it seems like many people who identify as Therian, you know, even just like furries and internet role players and stuff like that, it seems like they have that in abundance, and it's just currently focused on sexual gratification. And that it could perhaps instead be focused on things outside of sexual gratification and create super productive Ubermen of some kind, you know?
Yeah, I do think that like if possible that people that have these types of internalized sexualities, if they can channel it in a way that makes them more productive and happier and improves their well-being, like they should definitely pursue that.
Yeah, if they could. To be clear, I think that's what I'm doing now with me. Like now that I've said it out loud, it's made me think, I think that's what I'm doing with me. Like I am not currently a parent. I really want to be. I don't think I'm going to be a great parent off the bat, but I think I'm going to be a pretty okay one. And I have ideas about the kind of parent I would like to become. To that degree, I have a warm, fuzzy feeling about the image of and the relationship that I have in my head to the idea of myself in the future as a good parent. Like, is that not a meta attraction? It's not sexual strictly, but I have the same fuzzy feelings thinking about my partner, my FTM partner, thinking about them in the future as being a parent with me of our kids. And that's motivating in that way. There's sort of, it's like my ability to mentally model others, not just other existing people, but other future potential people, both of myself and other people, of what they could be, is a source of inspiration and motivation for me to take actual action in the now to try and become those things. And that is actually a good skill to have, so long as what task that ability is being set on is actually a productive and good one, as opposed to a self-destructive one.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like if I were to guess it, like part of like your sort of like base heterosexuality is kind of asserting itself in terms of like the desire to be a parent,
Yeah,
like the original heterosexuality instead of like the internalized form.
yeah, yeah. Like it's like the auto part is definitely still there, but it's just not. It doesn't drive my life anymore. It doesn't strike me as the most important possible thing, and I'm no longer under the delusion that I ought delete myself if I don't pursue transition. And so it's just faded. Its intensity is faded. It's still there, but it's not driving the ship anymore.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good healthy place to arrive at.
Mm.
Is there anything else you want to mention before I end recording?
I imagine. Could I call out probably my favorite possible people, I guess, that I think have done really good work in regards to like neurological, like pronatalism research, as well as advocacy, as well as general neurological,
Sure, give some shout outs.
like I have more on my channel, on my videos, well, on my video, which will become videos hopefully. But I think, and ideally, I would like this to be the title of the video, if at all possible, completely shamelessly, because I thought of it and I'm super excited about it. Do you know Based Camp with Simone and Malcolm Collins?
Yeah.
Yeah. The the I would like to be a Based Camp missionary. I think that's a role that would be cool to both create and then inhabit.
Yeah, I think it's cool what they're doing with
Mm.
basically being of the intellectual societal elite and then trying to just like make a bunch of them. I
That's a
think that's
really
like
kind way to say turbo autist, but that's also a thing you can
well,
say.
I mean, yeah, they're obviously turbo autists, but like the I mean, talk about like sustainability. Like they're
Mm.
doing it.
That they're certainly trying. That's all you can ask of anybody, including yourself. You can't tell anybody to have to succeed because they can't guarantee that. You can't guarantee that. To expect anyone to succeed is to set everyone up for failure, to be honest. Like, what you do is you expect them to try.
Is there anyone else you want to give shout out to? Or maybe want to mention your channel?
Oh, sure. I
So
mean, I've listed my name on the. I guess we could
okay.
talk super briefly about my name. My name's Lauren. I changed my name to that in 2014. or 15, I forget which. I don't have any intention of changing it back. And I'm certain that there is an element of that is from like the autoandrophobia, autogynephilic perspective.
Oh, for
Like
sure. Yeah.
like 100%. There's no way it's not.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
I also intentionally chose a name that's decisively female, but not excessively feminine. Like it's not Cecilia or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or like the I don't know, like the
Sarah.
Liliths and the crystals and the
Yeah. The even more specific ones. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I chose a name that if I was called that name by my parents in the vicinity of other people who didn't know me but knew my parents would hear and think, yeah, that sounds like something they could have named them. That was my goal there. My goal was to have a name that would blend with my family and with my parents in a way that would be convincing if somebody knew that name in the context of my family on a whole. Like it wouldn't scream this person renamed themselves.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah. But channel name though is Unread Librarian.
And what do you plan on putting in that channel?
The stuff that I plan on putting in that channel is like sort of like episodic videos just tackling different parts of my personal story in terms of experiences with autogynephilia, experiences with trans community, experiences with just general internet community, you know, in terms of like, I guess, the various grooming elements that there are online, which are less specific to people, more to like cultures. Because like you can be groomed by a culture without being groomed by a specific person.
Right. Like we were talking about with the Reddit stuff.
Yeah. That's a good example of that. I also want to talk about philosophy more broadly in regards to sustainable philosophy. Like, I don't think there's a word for this yet, like a topic phrase, but sustainable philosophy, sustainable philosophy, meaning philosophy that is sustainable. It is reproductively adequate. It is capable of sustaining itself ongoing. Like, I think that is incredibly important in a way where it's just self-evident. The thing I said before, it has to sustain itself in order to matter. Otherwise, it will stop existing and then it won't matter. Like, did that mean it didn't matter at the time? No. But there's a lot of time left in the universe. So how much do you want to matter? I think the answer should be as much as you can.
Yeah. And is there anything you would want to say to any of the AGPs in the audience?
You're not broken. There's nothing like, you're not damned. You're not evil. You're not inherently unworthy of love. You're not barred from the idea of having a relationship that you deem that you would find comfortable in living and have purpose in living with. Like, maybe that what that relationship ends up looking like is something that you don't conceive currently and that you think is maybe beyond you right now. But like, the only way to get there is to act as if it's possible for you to do so. So I suggest trying. Just have some belief in yourself to be able to try. That's the only thing you can ask of anyone, including yourself. The moment that you treat yourself as if you are inherently flawed in some irreconcilable, like, determinately evil way, you lose. You lose any potential that you have to do any good. And I've been there for years, And I was lucky enough to get out of it before it got, like, before I lost more years and or underwent specific medical procedures. Like, I've not had any surgeries, say, but I got very close. I think I was on a 3-year wait list for a vocal feminization surgery at some point. I came off the wait list and they gave me the letter saying, you're off the wait list to do the thing. And I said, at that point, I don't actually want this. You can take me off the list. This is not something I'm pursuing anymore. That could have happened. I didn't. And I don't feel bad about my voice anymore. Turns out, again, when I stopped paying attention to it as being the most important thing, it stopped mattering. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's a good note to close out on. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much.